Alrighty, hello folks, it's Miss Summers with your notes today on human impact on surface water. So on Friday, we talked a little bit about indicators of water quality, how we tell when water is clean or water is not clean, alright, and how that impacts the things that utilize water. So we talked about turbidity, which is how cloudy the water is. We talked about pH, which you can change by pollution. We talked about temperature, if the water gets too hot, that affects ecosystems. And then we talked about things like bioindicators, nitrates, and dissolved oxygen. So those were our 6 big ones. So today we're going to look at the big picture. We're going to look at how are we changing things like rivers and lakes? How are we impacting the surface water? And why that's important, particularly for human use. Why that's kind of a big deal and why you should care about it. So let's start with a couple different terms that should be new to us. We have non-point source pollution. That's our first term. So non-point is pollution that comes from many different sources. So if you were in fourth block, all right, on the early release day, last week or week before, whenever our early release day was, we had that scientist from the USGS, and she came on that Zoom meeting and talked about how she researched non-point source pollution. All right, this is pollution you can't tell where it comes from, so you can't point your finger and be like, it's that person's fault, because it comes from a whole bunch of different people. All right, use is usually carried by rain runoff. It can come from farms, from neighborhoods, from cities, from forests, from wherever you keep livestock. All right, all of that adds up into the river. That is in contrast to point source pollution. Point source pollution can be traced back to one identifiable source. So a point on a graph is like one spot. So a point here is one spot where you know everything's coming from. All right, so we have in this picture, we can say clearly something is coming out of this pipe. It looks like it's affecting the turbidity of the water. The water's a lot cloudier here. All right, and it's coming from this, whatever this area is. I don't know if it's like an industrial complex or something like that. All right, so point, you can point to it. It comes from one place. Non-point, it comes from a lot of places. You can't tell whose fault it is. Non-point is a lot harder to fix than point source. All right, I could go here to wherever this place is and be like, that's your problem, fix it, and it could be fixed. With non-point, because you have a bunch of different people contributing to it, it's a lot harder to control. All right, so how are we affecting fresh water availability? We are quite simply overusing it. All right, so I know we haven't talked about population yet, all right, but I trust that y'all are okay with the idea that human population overall, in the big scheme of things, is increasing. All right, every day more people are being born than are dying. All right, which means the demand on water increases. But we remember from the water cycle, we can never change the amount of water on Earth. I can't magically make more water. All right, and I remember when we talked about groundwater, all right, we never make water magically go away, but we can change where it's at to a point that we can't use it, and that's a problem. All right, so how are we messing stuff up? Number one, building dams and irrigation canals. Now, obviously, dam building and irrigation canals have benefits to humans. All right, we build dams in an effort to control where water goes. Okay, good old Lake Norman that we live next to, all right, was created because a dam was built in order to create electricity, which is really awesome. Irrigation canals can help turn very dry land into farmland, all right? But when you build a dam or divert water away from a river, okay, divert means it goes away, just like divergent boundaries. Look at me reviewing plate boundaries. Good job, Miss Summers. All right, when you make water, when you send it a different way, for irrigation, you are essentially decreasing how much fresh water is available for people down the way. Okay, remember, water always flows downhill, so if you're taking it out of the river upstream, the good old people downstream, they don't have any water, all right? So we watched that short documentary on Netflix called The Water Crisis Explained, and we saw how like the Colorado River was being used for irrigation a lot, especially in like California and like Nevada and Arizona, where it's like super duper dry. And like the people in Mexicali in Mexico, they were like, well, we don't have any water, which is a major issue. All right, this results in conflict. There's been lots of conflicts over human history, wars, in fact, that partly were driven by this need of, I need water and you have water, so I want your water, so it's my water. And then people are like, no, that's my water. Kind of a big deal. All right. So this one example I want us to look at is called the Aral Sea. The Aral Sea at one point was, I think, the fourth largest lake in the world. I don't know why that number comes to mind, but I think it's the fourth. Back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And as you can see, something has happened to it. Something has happened to it. So let's take a look at what happened to it. Ba-doop. We're looking at how people who have lived around the Aral Sea have been affected by this change. So I'm going to go here. We're going to say no ads. Oh, no, we're getting an ad.
So let's say you have to read an incredibly long email from your boss that you have to finish before the big meeting starts.
Skip ads. All right. So here we go. Here's what it used to look like.
Содан кейін теңіз уже соқта теңіз 60-шы жылдан бастап теңіз кетіп жатыр ғой, оны ешкім білген жоқ. Последний раз сол 1977-78 жылдары.
Lots of fishies.
Аралдың жағдайын бұл кезде ешкім ойлаған жоқ. Бұл кеуіп қалада осындай катастрофа экологический жағдайға ұшырайды деп бұл кезде ешкім ойлаған жоқ.
Lots of fishes.
Менің есімім Абылайхан, фамилиям Құмыратов. Ол солтүстік Арал теңізі бөгетінде инженер болып жұмыс істеймін. Арал теңізінде құйып тұрған екі өзеннің суын ирригацияға есепсіз пайдалану салдарынан 1989 жылда Арал теңізі екіге бөлінді.
Ол кезде теңіз қайтып кеткен бұл жерде. 76 жылы. Теңіз кішкентай теңіз, ащы суы. Қиналдым. Мен қиналып балықтан шықтым. Балық аулап жүрген жер. 87 жыл. Жаңағы шөптің басы тұзданады да. Содан келіп жеген мал, соны жеген мал. Соленый деген ауруға тап болды. Ана шөптің тұздылығы көбейіп. Басы ауырады. Басы ауырып, айналып, басын жер көреді, сонымен өледі. Мен 15-16 мал жоғалттым. Сондай түйе. Ауырып өлді. Қайтып келіп жатыр, ол ана дарияның бөгілгені. Ұлы теңіз бенен кіші теңіздің ортасындағы плотинаның бөгілгенінен әуелі ана кіші аралға су жиналды. Су жиналып тұшыды. Балықтар кетті. 99 жылы бұл құмнан бөгілген бөгетті бұзып кетті. Су. Бұзғаннан кейін кетіп қалды. Сөйтті де соны Қазақстан үкіметі қолға алып, бүкіл дүниежүзілік банкпенен Қазақстан Республикасының президенті Назарбаевтың қолдауыменен шлюз салынды. Шлюз салынғалы халықтың жағдайы жақсы. Кеткендерден келгендері де бар, көшіп келгендер. Менің өзім 3 үй көшіріп әкелдім. Балық аулап жатыр. Сосын ақша табады балықтан. Қазір елге свет келді 2009 жылы. Телефон келді. Соның бәрі осы теңіздің келген берекеті.
Атым Маржан. Байбол қызы. Осы Арал ауданында тудым. 1948 жылы. Аралда орыстар көп болды. Мен өзім орыс мектебінде оқыдым. Орыстардың бірге сол класста қазақпен бірге біз мектепте оқығанда бір класста 2-ақ қазақ болатын еді. Ары кетсе 3 қазақ болады. Қалғандардың бәрі орыс, украин, белорус, армяндар болды бізде. В общем, многонациональный болды ғой. Солардың бәрі кеше Арал кеткеннен кейін барлығы да кете бастады. Барлығы өздерінің елдеріне қашып көшті. Қазір мен тұрайын қаңырап ане заводтар тұр. Зданиялар бәрі жұмыс жоқ, өліп қалған кәдімгі. Мертвая тишина дейді, орысша айтқанда. Барлығы көшті. Қазір біздің Аралда қазақтар қалып отыр. Біз қайыққа барамыз? Еш жаққа бара алмаймыз. Осы жақта қаламыз. Айтып жатыр ғой жан жақтан. Сақтап қалса, сақтап қалсын, халықтың наны ғой ол деген. Мүмкін сол немереміздің немересі көре ме? Оны айтып отырмын ғой.
Alright, so we're going to leave it there. So, back to here. So the people were affected. I think that lady at the end there, she really eloquently, she said the sea is the bread of the people. So water, remember, the water wasn't just there for like water's sake. Like that's really nice and all right? But individuals relied on this as an economic source. So when that went away, people's livelihoods are at stake. You know, the ones that left did. Like she was saying, the people that came from Russia and Belarus and Ukraine and all that good stuff, you know, they left because there was no jobs. But people who were born and raised in Aral, who were, you know, Kazakhstani nationals, they didn't really have anywhere to go. So that's a big problem. That's going to create social conflict when you don't have a way for people to take care of themselves. All right? Now, you might be like, oh, that really sucks, Miss Summers. That must be like a former Soviet thing, right? Right? That's a problem in the former Soviet Union. No, it's the problem right here in the good old US of A. All right? The Aral Sea dried up because the rivers that fed it were being used for irrigation for cotton in the former Soviet Union. And we still haven't learned our lesson. Here in the United States and all around the world, reservoirs are being overused and depleted. A fine example of this is good old Lake Mead. If you're not familiar with where Lake Mead is, Lake Mead was created as a result of the building of the Hoover Dam about 80 to 90 years ago. It dammed the mighty Colorado River. All right, that's the river that makes the Grand Canyon, or that made the Grand Canyon. All right, so it created the largest freshwater reservoir in the United States. All right, and supplied water for a vast number of folks. And we're going to look at what's happened to it. All right, what's happened to good old Lake Mead? We're going to say no ads. This is not on YouTube, so there are no ads. Where did the video go? Oh, there it is. And we're going to full screen this bad boy. Enjoy. So, what's happening to Lake Mead? Why is it drying up? Why are we doing this? All that good stuff. We're going to full screen it. This is going to play any second now.
Lake Mead, the largest man-made lake in the U.S., is about to reach its lowest point since the installation of the Hoover Dam in the 1930s. A lake that has full capacity close to 31 million acre-feet is now at 34%.
That is really strange. Why is there an ad? All right. Anyway, so here's a transcript of it. So Lake Mead is the largest man-made reservoir in the U.S. It's reached its lowest point in its entire history. It is only 34% full. It is only 34% full. So the question is, why is it only 34% full? All right. it is 34% full because we have decades of drought along with increased water needs. So because climate is changing to being on the warmer side, all right, you're not getting as much runoff from the mountains, all right? The Colorado gets its water, Lake Mead gets its water from the Colorado River, the Colorado River gets its water from the snow that falls on the Rockies. Because it's getting warmer, there's not as much snow, means not as much water is getting down there. Now, why is that a problem? You're like, oh, well, if we run out of water, you can't drink any water, Miss Summers. That's a fine and dandy problem. Don't get me wrong. All right. But Lake Mead is also providing hydroelectric power for 40 million people. All right. And as we see here, if water level falls below 950 feet, Nevada, okay, one of the states that primarily uses Lake Mead, not only do you run the risk of running out of like drinking water, which is a big problem, but also running the risk of not having enough electricity. All right, because of that, you get things like rolling blackouts, which is a major, major problem. So what's being done? This article was posted earlier this year. Lake Mead will likely experience its first federally declared water shortage next year. All right. Basically, what all these states are having to do, the 7 states that primarily pull from the Colorado, are going to have to change how much water they're taking out, trying to cut back how much is being utilized so that that reservoir has a chance to kind of regain some of that water that it's lost over the years. All right, it happens right here in the good old US of A. All right, so we can run out of water accessible to us. We're never going to run out of like water like on Earth. Like, it's not like the water is magically going away, but we can use it so much that it's not where we need it to be anymore. Alrighty, so how else do we mess up water? So we overuse it. Well, that's not fun. All right. We impact water by also affecting its quality through runoff. So remember, runoff's that part of the water cycle where water stays on the surface. In urban areas, you have more runoff. Whoops! Because you have pavement that is impermeable, so water doesn't go through it. It just stays on top. And this runoff picks up stuff that is left on the ground. All right, so if you are changing oil in the driveway or whatever, and some of it gets on the pavement, it's going to run off into the storm drain. All right, these storm drains don't go anywhere magical. They literally just empty out into a freshwater source like a creek. So anything you put in there goes straight there, which is why you're not supposed to put stuff in there. All right, the other problem with urbanization is thermal pollution. We talked a little bit about this on Friday when we talked about how changing the temperature of water is a bad thing. All right. Pavement gets a lot hotter than like regular ground, like grass or soil, which means the water that runs off of pavement also is hotter, and that's harmful for your aquatic ecosystems. Like I told you about the little fishies, all right, the little fishies die if the water gets too hot or they can't reproduce, which affects their population, which affects the food chain, which affects humans' ability to collect resources out of nature. And our last impact, again, this is something that we talked about on Friday, agriculture. So the main culprit with agriculture, all right, the main impact agriculture has on water is something called eutrophication. With this E word right here, eutrophication. Eutrophication is caused by fertilizers, which contains which water quality indicator? Nitrates. Very good. Nitrates cause eutrophication. Basically, you put fertilizer in the water. Because there's so much fertilizer, the algae blooms. It's like, wee, fertilizer. All right, which is all fine and dandy until the algae dies. As the algae dies, it's the bacteria that's breaking it down, sucks up all the oxygen in the water. Now your water becomes a dead zone. All right. So here are some examples. So again, this is from the notes on Friday, so this should look extremely familiar, but it's a little like step by step All right. If you're using excess fertilizer in order to increase crop yields, some of that's going to end up in your water supply. As it's in your water supply, you get all your algae. As your algae decomposes, that is what kills all of this off. Now, why is this a problem? Well, obviously, if you're killing all your living things off in water, you are affecting that ecosystem. We're going to look at Gulf of Mexico downtown. Do-do-do-do-do. Do-do-do-do-do. This is happening, across all sorts of bodies of water. One of them in particular, all right, and again, if you were in fourth block, the scientist that y'all talked to, this was her current project that she's working on in partnership with NASA. She's looking at the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. Eutrophication has happened here, all right, and what they're finding is that oxygen levels around the Gulf of Mexico, especially around the Mississippi Delta. Okay, remember the Mississippi Delta is like right around here. It's where the good old Mississippi River ends. All right, there's so much nitrates, it's creating these toxic algae blooms that are sucking up the oxygen, and this is affecting your ecosystem along here. Now, why is that a bad thing? What do a lot of people around this area of the United States, what do they do for a living? They utilize the Gulf as their main economic thingy. All right, they are fishermen. They're people that are harvesting shrimp and fish and all that fun stuff. Okay, and obviously, if your oxygen level is changing because of agricultural pollution, you're going to be harming all of these folks as well. Okay, so that concludes our notes for today on surface water and how people impact them. All right, please see Canvas for what you do next.